Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Study Chronicles. Last time we looked at the hijack versus the big blind from the hijack perspective. Today I'm going to go over the big blind's perspective. So we looked a little bit at a scenario similar to this in the button versus big blind series. So we do have a lot of heuristics that are going to carry over, but the range compositions are going to be different. So there is some to learn, especially early position versus the blinds versus late position versus the blinds. I think you'll see that when we look at positions like cutoff versus big blind and button versus big blind, those will be a lot more similar. So yeah, we found some heuristics that we put down in our notes that I'm going to quickly go over, and then we're going to jump right into the study and looking at the ranges. Let me pull up the wizard. Here we go. Okay, so these are the notes that we have been taking. We take note on each position for the scenario, and then I try and add in some leaks. I could put this in red to make it stand out. I'll probably color code everything and make it look nicer. There's apparently an AI cleanup you can use for Evernote, which is pretty cool. It kind of organizes everything for you. Maybe I'll click that later. But for now, from the hijack, we were looking at taking some heuristic notes, which was you're c-betting at a fairly high frequency compared to the button, which is only c-betting about 47%. We have all four sizings most of the time on each texture. There are some textures that prefer small or medium, like paired boards, monotone boards, and boards with a 3 straight already on them. However, there are some larger bets on those boards as well. But as the boards come up, we'll take note of which ones maybe are better for just having a smaller size or a larger size. My leaks so far in this scenario have just been not using the small size enough on the turn when an overcard comes off. So I think typically I simplify my strategy to having more polarized sizings on the turn, which is perhaps losing out on some value in a lot of scenarios, because I think players are probably overfolding on the turn versus an overbet or a large bet. So having a small bet on the turn makes a lot of sense when the overcards come off, depending on the texture. But yeah, definitely going to take note of that. And on the monotone boards, I'm probably under c-betting. I'm probably checking too much. It looked like it was actually a higher frequency c-bet than normal on monotone boards, hijack versus the big blind. Okay, let's have a look first at the range that we're going to be defending from the big blind. So we always like to go over the pre-flop ranges before we dive into the post-flop stuff. We'll see that the hijack is opening. And this is the big blind defense frequency. So we have hands as strong as pocket queens. We have hands as strong as ace queen suited, even a little bit of ace king offsuit. You can see there's a sliver of green for call. Ace queen offsuit is a pure call. I think this might surprise some players, where I think most people think that ace queen is just always going to be like a 3-betting hand. But out of position versus early position in a high raked game, we're going to see a lot of these hands be defended. Sorry, that was on 50 NL, but 500 NL is similar, same idea. In fact, 50 NL is a higher raked game, and we saw ace king was calling a bit less. So 500 with less rake is calling a little bit more, right? So that just kind of shows the rake effect of the different level that you're playing. So if you are playing 50 NL and under, and you want to use those ranges for GTO Wizard, that would be good, because it's more like the environment that you're playing in. But if you're playing something like 200 NL or higher, maybe even 100 NL, you might want to start getting used to like the 500 ranges where the rake is reduced a lot. But having 50 NL ranges is a good idea if you are playing in that higher rake environment. So anyway, defending as weak as 10-8 off, 9-7 off, 8-6 off, Jack-9 off. I definitely am not defending wide enough, which is kind of crazy because I have looked at pre-flop ranges so much in the last few years, but I still am hesitant to defend these combos here that are a mix, but that is something I'm going to maybe take note of. Defending as weak as 8-6 off, Jack-9 off. So that kind of gives me an idea of where the thresholds are, right, for these weaker hands here. Even King-8 off, King-6 off at a mix. Offsuit aces, I have been overfolding. Definitely overfolding here. I need to defend versus a min raise more often. So another leak of mine is going to be let's start doing the leak. Not defending offsuit combos enough. So I think I'll just make it a broad statement because I'm just not defending an offsuit Broadway combo or offsuit combos enough. That includes all of the aces and some of the 9-7, 8-6, 8-7 off, 9-8 off. But yeah, they are going to be a high frequency defense. Now, one thing we haven't talked about yet in this series is changing the pre-flop opening size. Now, some players don't use a min raise, and that's going to affect our strategy out of the big blind significantly. And you can play around with that by changing the opening size to 2.5x, which is more kind of a universal sizing I find that players use, especially at lower stakes. And you'll see when players use that 2.5x opening size, all of a sudden, all of those hands are gone, right? All of those hands, this is where I get my habit of overfolding the weak aces and the weak offsuit combos, is that I am typically responding to a 2.5x in my head a lot of the time when people use a 2x. But yeah, you need to fold a lot. And then if you really want to dive deep into some larger sizings, they have a pre-flop only where you can use a 3x opening size. And then you can really see how often we need to fold the big blind versus a 3x size. So at this point, you see we're even just starting to 3-bet some of our pocket pairs because we're not really happy about calling some of these hands, so we're turning them into a semi-bluff. We're even folding a lot of the offsuit broadways, etc., etc. So yeah, against a 3x, you have to really be tight. Even folding queen 8, jack 8, I probably am not folding enough here. To be honest, I'm probably defending these two, probably defending this. But yeah, I'm probably folding everything else. This is pretty straightforward, I think. So anytime you have this increase in pre-flop sizing, your range is going to shrink significantly. Nothing too surprising there. So we're going to assume, again, a min raise from the hijack. So we're going to have a fairly wide range from the big blind. But just to give you guys an idea of what it looks like when you're facing a min raise versus when you're facing a larger sizing, because we haven't really gone over that yet. All right, so if we call, we get to the flop and we're the first to act. So how often is the big blind going to lead? We looked at leading in the last scenario, button versus big blind, where I think it was like a 4% lead or something like that. I think as you get later in position, I might be leading a bit less. Let's take a look. I can't remember the exact effect on position and leading frequency. So we're going to compare both scenarios side by side. So we're going to compare hijack versus big blind, and we're going to compare button versus big blind really quick. And we'll see that for the big blind lead frequency, we have 4.1%. And then for the big blind lead frequency against the hijack, we have 3.7%. So the range tightens up a bit. With that logic, I think we'll see under the gun versus big blind be even less of a lead frequency. Yeah, so we have 2.9%, so that checks out. So against wider ranges, we perhaps have a little bit of a higher leading frequency. But in the hijack versus big blind scenario, we're going to peel back a little bit on leading. So let's go back to raising hijack versus big blind. So When we do lead, again, it's going to be those same textures as before in the other scenarios, 8 high and lower board textures. You're going to see a lot of leading. Connected boards are going to be better. So 765, 654. These are very intuitive to lead when you see them because you're going to actually have a lot of really strong hands, right? You're going to have those 8-9 offsuits like we were looking at. You're going to have those weak suited combos that make straights that villain doesn't. You're going to have all of the sets and 2-pair combos. So keeping that in mind, but the most common choice is going to be check. And then on hijack, we played this scenario the other day. Has a high frequency c-bet. The most common c-bet sizing is going to be 33 and 50. So if hijack does bet 33, our response after checking is going to be raise 100 or raise 50, call or fold. And you see that the most common thing is to continue in the hand. We're not folding a majority of the time. So most of the time we're either floating with a call or we're putting in a raise 50 or 100. I think we've looked at when to use 50 and when to use 100, but paired boards typically are going to be used as a 50% raise. And then board textures that really hit our range well. So like the middling type boards, like 884, 755 with the paired boards, and then we'll see some other boards that are more connected. Perhaps if you scroll down, you'll just keep looking through the different textures. You have 643, 653, those connected boards that we're also going to be leading at a decent frequency on, 764. And then the 100% sizing, I think we're going to see those boards where we have more nutted hands. This is where the middling boards comes into play. Jack 10-5, 10-9-6, 10-9-7. A lot of the cards 7 through Jack are going to be very strong for the big blind defense. And we're going to have a lot of nutted hands that want to check raise for the larger sizing. So that's going to be a typical heuristic you'll see out of position is whatever board texture hits the core part of the defense range. That's the one that we're going to use more of the larger sizings on. Also, the 50 sizing, also board textures that are going to favor villain over us. So boards that we don't typically have a very strong range on are also going to be a more polarized check raising scenario. So a board like King Jack 4, where I think the hijack is going to have a big range advantage, that's when we want to polarize our range and use the larger sizing. So we might not have a very high frequency for check raising, but when we do, we're going to raise the 100% sizing, right? And it's going to be a very polar range. Whereas if we take a look at something like 10-10-7, right, then we'll see that we're raising a whole lot and we're using the 50% sizing. So the less polar we are in some scenarios, I think the more we're going to have the 50 sizing. Okay. So what else do we need to look at before we jump in to the drills? I guess if villain uses some of the larger sizings, I think if villain uses an overbet, we rarely have a raise. But if we do, we're going to use the 50%. We're folding most of the time versus overbets. And then the boards that we can raise 50% on are typically going to be those boards where we have a lot of strong hands. So 654, 986, 975, et cetera, et cetera. There is one unique board here. I don't know if you saw it, but trip aces, very unique because our continuing range is going to be so narrow. On this texture, you see that we're folding nearly 80% of our hands. So the hands that we do continue with are going to often have quads in them, which is pretty cool. And so, yeah, we're going to be raising those textures versus an overbets when we're continuing because we can't really, again, continue with very many strong hands. We don't have the strong pocket pairs as often as hijack does, like kings and queens. So we see that we're actually going to be folding a lot and raising a decent portion of our range on that texture because we do have quads, right? We do have the suited aces that defend pre-flop. We do have some weak suit offsuit aces as we saw. So we do have the nuts on this texture. And then versus an overbet, it narrows down our continuing range a lot to either nuts or some kind of middling weak hand. Okay, let's jump into the drills, shall we? So I just made this drill. Can you explain how to calculate check raise sizing? I think I've been doing that, talking about what textures are good for using 50 or 100. The board textures which have a more polarized range want to use more 100%, and the boards that are going to hit our range very well are going to raise more often and use a 50% sizing as a general heuristic. Okay, let's jump into the drills. Don't want that. Hold on. Let me go back. We'll edit this one real quick. Forgot to uncheck this here. There we go. Okay. Tribendo, it's just there's a couple of ways you can calculate what the actual raise size is. For me, if I'm playing live poker, I add up everything in the pot and then take half of it if I'm raising 50% and then add that on top of the initial bet. Or if it's pot size, then I just take the whole pot size and add it on to the initial bet. So let's say the pot is $1 and villain bets $1. In order to call the bet, I would put the $1 in first. So there's $3 in the pot. And then I would add $3 to the initial $1 bet, which is $4, and that would be 100% raise. If I wanted to raise half pot, I would take half of what was in the middle of the initial bet, which was 3, so 1.5 plus the 1 that's in there. So the raise would be 2.5 if I wanted to raise half pot. Okay, let's get into the drill. So right away, we get one of those hands that we are under defending. So a board texture like this, typically, I wouldn't hit it as often if I'm under defending offsuit combos like 9-7 and 9-8, and 10-8 and Jack-9, etc. So this is a texture we're going to pure check. I don't think we can lead 10 high boards. It's only until we get down to like the 8 or 9 high boards that we want to start leading, mostly the 8 and under boards. So once we check, villain checks back. Now, what is our strategy here? This is an interesting spot because I think a lot of players are very different in the way they approach this spot. Some players only have an overbet. Some players have a mix of sizings. Some players have a pure check. I don't suggest that ever, but a lot of people approach these spots in different ways. I approach it in whatever GTO wizard tells me to do, because I think that's going to be the best way to go about it. Having multiple sizings, I just joke about the GTO wizard thing, but having multiple sizings here is really good. And then understanding when to use the small, medium, large, and overbets is sometimes tricky. But the heuristic and shortcut that I use for figuring out my sizing is just looking at my hands. Where does my hand fall in a category of equity? Does it fall into a best hand? Does it fall into a medium hand? Does it fall into a weak hand? What kind of hand do I have? So for example, this is a 9-7 offsuit on a 10-9-8-4 board. This hand is probably classified as good to weak, I would guess, against a hijack range, right? Hijack can still check back a lot of strong hands here. Even though they are c-betting at a fairly high frequency, they are going to check back some stronger hands. So against a strong check back range still, we're going to probably have good to weak equity. What does a hand that has good to weak equity want to bet? Probably a sizing that's medium to small, right? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to go for an overbet here with this hand. We're not going to get called by much worse for 2 streets. If I do bet 2 streets, So I would say I'm going to mostly check or bet small or medium with this hand. Now, let's say I had something like Queen Jack. Well, that would make a lot more sense to have in an overbet range, right? Because that's the nuts. We can go overbet, and try and get as much money from our hand as possible. Let's say we have something like Jack 5 of diamonds, right? That's a good hand to overbet as well because we want to get folds, but we have a ton of equity. So classifying hands into sizings is fairly straightforward when it comes to like identifying how much equity you have with the hand and then where that category falls into place with your entire range. So on a texture like this, I assume we can have a small, medium, large, and maybe even overbet sizing. We can classify this one as a medium. So like I said, I'm going to go small or medium, but I do want to look after I just ranted for, a couple minutes there about if we do have all of the sizings. So let's go for a check here this time. But as you can see, our three options are check, small, and medium, right? We're not messing with these with this particular hand. Versus a bet, I think this is just going to be a pure check call. The solver does want to turn this hand into a bluff at some frequency, which is interesting. Again, villain's going to have some delayed overpairs in their strong check back range. So putting those to the test is a pretty good strategy here when we block 9-9, 10-9, 7-6, and we have a decent bit of equity with our straight draw, and our 9 might not be good anymore against the delayed bet here, right? So it looks like the solver does want to turn this into a semi-bluff some of the time, but I decided to call this time. So that's something also I might need to pay attention to is not check raising medium weak hands enough on turn, right? So that could be a leak that I just identified where I'm not taking that aggressive approach enough on the turn. River, I think we're going to just pure check, and facing a 3x overbet now, we have a weird decision because we do block the really strong hands that they should have for this, right? 7-6, 9-9, 10-9. I guess we don't block 10-9 because they don't have the offsuit combos of those. We can pick and choose our combos for calling here. I think we would take priority calling a 10. But after a 10, we don't really have that much. Maybe some pocket jacks and queens here. But I think we really want to be blocking a queen. A lot of their combos should be queen jack, queen 10 maybe. I don't know. This is a weird scenario. I think, what are their bluffs, right? What are their bluffs for 3x potting here? Perhaps something that blocks my ace 10 and my king 10. So maybe actually turning ace king into a bluff could be a thing here. Maybe turning king queen into a bluff could be a thing here. I think I'm going to call this time. I rolled a 19, which is a strong number. Feels icky. Maybe I only am supposed to just call like something like Jack 9 instead, because yeah, but I think I'm going to call. And so it does look like the solver wants to call at some frequency, but not happy about it. And villain shows up with pocket eights. So yeah, strong bet size, strong hand, makes a lot of sense to have an overbet from them. And I assume they would play nines the same way too, which is why having a 9 is relevant here. But also having a hand like 9-8 would be even better for bluff catching, I think. So this one was on the fringe. If you think that the pool is under bluffing, wouldn't be so bad to just pure fold this one. Let's have a look at the scenario for sizing on the turn, like I mentioned earlier. So when it goes check, check, and we get to the turn, big blind is going to, in fact, have all the sizings, right? Overbet, large bet, medium, and small. So having all those sizings and learning how to group them is, like I said before, fairly straightforward depending on your equity and where it falls in the category. So if we were to look at something like Jack 5 of diamonds, like I mentioned earlier, this is a hand that's going to be mostly overbet, right? Makes a lot of sense. If we look at Queen Jack, this is a hand that mostly wants to be overbet, right? So understanding where your polarized range is, understanding where your medium strength hands are, right? Betting 50%, you can see 10-7 is square in that like medium strength hand that wants to go for a medium sized bet. Same thing with pocket jacks at a mix. So you have a lot of mixing here going on. King Jack 10, big blind versus hijack. We're never leading this board, so we start off with a check facing a medium bet. This is a hard board to defend out of the big blind because this is a board that hits the hijack very well, and hijack is range betting. So if hijack is range betting, do we want to defend a7 suited here with backdoor spades? I feel like maybe we can have a mix of check raise. Ideally, we would have a queen instead of an ace, I think, because that has more equity. Can I fold here? This is tough. What do we do? I think my intuition is fold. I don't think I'm pure calling this hand. This might be one of the spots I'm leaking where I'm not defending enough, but I'm going to fold this time. Yeah, okay, so it is a mixed fold. Otherwise, it is going to be a continue as a call or even a raise as a semi-bluff, which makes sense because this hand is kind of just like a weak hand that can make the backdoor nuts, can make the straight, but against a really tight range isn't doing too well. And if we check raise all of our ace-x, we're just doing it way too often, so makes sense. All right. Next board. So here's the first board we have that is a leading candidate, and we actually rolled low. So I'm going to go ahead and globally lead any combo if I roll a 22. Doesn't matter what I have in my hand, I'm going to mix in a lead, because if we look at the solution for a texture like this, I think we're going to just see our entire range lead at a frequency. So we're going to go ahead and lead, and I am incorrect, which is good for learning. So this hand, I guess, doesn't have enough equity to do that. I would have guessed that we had a global lead there on a texture like that, but it doesn't seem like we do. Seems like the solver is a bit more picky about which hands it leads. Typically, I'm good at finding the only hand that doesn't lead when I say things like, I think the range is going to lead, right? But anything with clubs is going to be less so of a lead. So Jack 10 suited specifically with clubs or diamonds is not a lead. Let's see if we can find one other combo. Queen Jack, there we go. King Queen. So the broadways with diamonds or clubs don't seem to want to have a lead here. Ace 10. But if you look at hands like Queen 5 of diamonds, Queen 5 of clubs, if you look at anything with a 5 or an 8 in it, you're going to typically see a lead. Even a 9 is going to, nope, 9s are not going to mix. Take that back. Looks like maybe 10-9. Yeah, 10-9 is the worst hand here that has some backdoor straight draws. But the others without some equity. So I take it back. We're not going to globally lead our range. There are some hands that are a bit more selective with the clubs and the diamonds. But as a strategy, I don't think I'm losing out that much EV by leading these hands. You can see here, it's still a positive EV play leading this texture. But it's just not going to be one of the combos that we use. So mistake there. And then usually when you take an aggressive line with the hand that shouldn't have taken an aggressive line, you just want to give up, right? Like to kind of make sure you're not compounding your mistake. If you're over raising pre-flop, for example, let's say you're stealing the button too wide because big blind's folding too much and then big blind defends, one of the adjustments you have to make with those hands is playing more passively with them. You don't all of a sudden start trying to win money with those hands that you were stealing to exploit on pre-flop, right? Same idea with over c-betting. If you're over c-betting a flop and you're getting to the turn, you don't just use those absolute trash hands that you were using as an exploit to then start building a strategy of aggression. It's usually going to be more passive with those hands because those are the hands that should have folded the flop. They don't really have much equity. They don't have good blockers. There was a reason they were not used as a c-bet, right? So whenever you take a line where you think you're exploiting someone or you have too many of a certain combo, you have to reel back your range a lot. And I think that's what a lot of these over aggressive players have a problem with, is once they turn on that aggression switch, they don't know how to like change gears and switch it back off. So they end up losing a lot of money with some weaker hands and spots where they're just trying to win the pot at this point because they think, oh, this is the bottom of my range. But it's going to end up costing you a ton of money if you start doing that with all of your weaker hands that shouldn't be there. Little side note. King 8-2, pure check. Going to check folds. Don't think there's anything interesting there. King 8-6. So this is a board where I typically have a check raise frequency. As a heuristic, I globally just check raise about 33 to 40% with my flush draws, depending on what my flush draw is. I typically call the weaker parts of the flush draw range and then check raise a little bit more, like 40 to 50% with the stronger parts. So for example, if I have something like 9-7 or 10-9 suited here, 5-4 suited, ace-high suited with a weak kicker, those are the combos I'm going to check raise at a higher frequency. This one I think is going to check raise at least 14% of the time, which is what I rolled. So we're going to take the check raise and we're going to use, I think we're going to use the 50% sizing here on a King 8-6 board. We could have 100% sizing as well. Maybe the solver is going to mix between the two, but I'm going to use the 50 this time. And we do in fact mix the two sizings, but not as much of a check raise as I would have guessed. This is kind of like the in-between flush, I guess. It doesn't have a lot of straight draws at all. Doesn't have any straight draws. And isn't really like a strong ace-high flush draw. So I guess this one falls more into the call category. Also, Villain did use a half pot sizing, not a small sizing. Against the larger sizings, you typically check raise less. So to double check my like theory and heuristics, I'll take a quick look at the range and then we'll play the next one. But this is how personally I learn. I build up a lot of heuristics and I build up a lot of, ideas about what hands want to do what, and then I double check that theory, right? So we said that 9-7, 10-9 would be a higher frequency check raise as a flush draw. So we can actually filter for flush draws like this. Combo draws, flush draws, nuts. There we go. And then take a look. So 9-7 suited, right? This one is almost a pure check raise for a mix of both sizings. And then we have stuff like ace-5, like a weak kicker, much higher frequency check raise. So I think my theory checks out here. We have all of the weak suited aces check raising a lot more. And then we have hands like 5-2 of spades, which are barely check raising at all. Right? The weaker parts of our flush range that just want to just check call, see the turn, not build a huge pot against some reverse implied odds scenarios, right? Like if the hijack c-bets here, they're going to have a lot of strong spades as well. So we really want to prioritize those ace of spades for check raising. We want to prioritize some kind of backdoor straight draw. So something like Queen 7 suited is a much better hand than Queen 2 suited, right? Anytime we have a combo draw, those are going to be high frequency check raises. So all flush draws aren't created equal. Once the turn comes a 9, this is going to be, I want to say, an okay card for our range. I think our options are going to be 75 and 125 here in check. Again, because this hand doesn't really have a ton of equity here on this turn now, I think check is going to be the primary play. So I'm just going to check here, rolled 71. I think we're going to check like really high frequency here. Damn. Okay. Well, I was at least right about the bet sizings used, right? We're going to overbet or bet 75, but this one does seem to really want to put in a bet. I guess the 9 of hearts is better than I thought it was. I guess the 9 of hearts completes enough straights that we're going to have in our check raise range. So if you think about, again, what our check raise range was on the flop, a lot of our high frequency combos were the combo draws, hands like 7-5 of spades, 10-7 of spades, and those make a straight. 9-7 of spades, those make now a pair and a straight draw. So yeah, I guess being very aggressive on this 9 makes a lot of sense. And we can kind of look as to perhaps why we're overbetting now near pure frequency with our flush draw. And yeah, it's because most of our range is betting the turn. Huge turn card for our range. And we can look at the reports like this. Let's see what turn cards were really good. Wow. Okay. So yeah, 9, one of the better cards for our range. And we can even break this down into equity. So we can look at big blind equity here, clicking this button, and we'll see the lighter colors are the better turns for us. So green and yellow are going to be good. So you can see right away that the 9 of spades and the 10 of spades and the 5 of spades are all going to be the best turn cards for us. After that, we have the 9 offsuit combos and the combos that bring back door hearts. And the 5s, the 7s. So anything that completes a straight on the turn, we're going to play a very aggressive strategy. And we can also see this by looking at just the strategy. And you can see where all of the red is, where we're going to have a lot of betting. So you can see on the 7s, we're going to have a ton of betting. 5s, we're going to have a ton of betting. And 9s and 10s, we're going to have a lot of betting. So I guess that's going to be the strategy there. I'm probably playing too passive on turns then. Going to write this down, playing too passive after check raise on good turns for our range, right? Playing too passive after check raise, blah. There we go. So I love when I make mistakes because that allows me to find things I can fix and get better at, right? Once the flush comes in and we check, I think we're going to mostly go for a large bet, maybe some check raise. This hand is pretty dang strong. Second nuts. Here's a heuristic for you. Whenever the pot is small, whenever the SPR is high, and we have a nutted hand, always consider checking because the best way to get all of your money in is going to be check raise, right? The second best might be something like small bet to hope that they raise that we can then shove over. And then the third best is going to be just jamming ourselves, right? Like jamming ourselves or betting very large for value. The problem with the last option is that villain has to have a strong hand that they're going to bet call versus, or sorry, they're just going to have to have a strong hand that they played passively as well. That's what I meant. Sorry. Which isn't going to be the case very often. Whereas when we check, they're going to have a lot of bluffs we're going to get value from. They're going to have a lot of like medium to good hands that they're going to get thin value, that they're now having to bluff catch with. It's a good idea to have some check frequency. That being said, we rolled aggressive here. I'm just going to go for a large bet. I think I could also maybe use a overbet. No, there you go. There's my logic shown, right? The solver wants to pure check, undoubtedly to check raise, because that's going to be the best way to get value with a nutted hand like this. So it makes sense to me that we have a check here. Yeah, cool. All right. Next hand, pure check folds, pretty easy hand. Next, ace jack, 9-8-3, interesting. Don't think we have a lead. I was gonna say we could float, but not versus an overbet. Versus an overbet, I think we're just gonna fold pure. All right, let's play 3 more hands, and then we're gonna get into our grind. Queen 3-2. Always checking. Always check folding, I think. Yep. King Jack 3, not gonna lead. Oops. Okay, so interesting spot on turn. Now, we saw that we have all 4 options on a board texture like 9, 8, 7. What was the board texture? Something middling connected, right? And then the turn was a brick. But on a monotone board that favors the villain, I think we're going to mostly have checks. First of all, I think we're going to be checking like 70 to 80% of the time. Which means we're going to have a small, maybe medium, maybe over bets. I think we're still going to have all 4 options, but check is going to be the primary option on a texture like this. So we're going to check this time. And we do in fact have these 3 options here. This one doesn't really make sense to overbet because we don't have a nutted combo, right? Like if we had the ace of spades, maybe we would see overbet, but when we have a bad spade, it doesn't make a lot of sense to turn this into an overbet, but we can still have a mix of bets and check. I think with our range, we're going to check the most. Let me see. I think we're going to check at a fairly high frequency. Yeah, so we have an 80% global check. Nope, that's right. Yeah. We have an 80% global check. So I was right about that. But this combo is a little bit more aggressive than I thought, which does make sense because we have an ace. An ace in our hand is always blocking strong hands that villain can continue with, like if they checked back ace king, if they checked back ace jack, if they checked back aces, etc. So I guess it's not too surprising when we have an offsuit ace that we're going to be more aggressive with a hand like this. And on river, we could even turn our hand into a bluff, I think. Because of the same reasons I just mentioned. So I'm going to go aggressive here. I'm going to go for a large bet. Damn. Should have checked. And if we did bet, large bet was good. Actually, like large bet is technically okay. It's an inaccuracy because of how low of a frequency it is. But if you look at the EV, it's not that much different. But yeah, I got to be careful not to do this too much. All right, last hand, and then we're going to wrap it up. 10-6-4, easy check. Checks back. Now, on turn, again, I think we're going to have all 4 sizings. This hand qualifies as an absolute trash hand with no equity. These hands we're typically never going to overbet the turn. I don't even think we're going to bet the turn. We want to have at least 2 overcards if we're going to even think about betting the turn, because we need that extra equity, right? So I think this is going to be a pure check, which it is. Now, the interesting thing, though, with these trash hands is that they play well as river bluffs, right? They don't play well on turn because they don't have any equity. But on the river, you don't need any equity, right? At this point, we're trying to fold out. Hey, Endurance, thanks for the 17 months. Welcome back to the expedition. Really appreciate that. So yeah, we don't need equity on the river to bluff. We just have to fold out better hands. So once this 5 completes a straight, this is not a bad hand to put in as a mixed bluff. I don't want to over bluff in this spot because we rolled an 88, which is a really passive number. But I do think we would bluff this hand like anywhere between 30 and 40% of the time. So I checked, and in fact, we are bluffing 44% of the time. So yeah, good estimate for me there. But it's also very important that we're not over bluffing. It's very easy to over bluff this spot. This is a spot where a lot of higher stake regs love to make calls because they just justify it by saying, you know, oh, this is an over bluff spot, which they would be right. But yeah, against regs, I typically try and not over bluff because I know that. All right. Good session, I think. I really like that one. Playing out of the big blind is very unique. It's very fun to play, you know, all of the different sizings. For me personally, it keeps it more challenging for me. It keeps me more engaged, keeps me thinking about my ranges. Whereas sometimes I think something that people don't talk enough about is if you have only one sizing on the turn or two sizings on the turn, it kind of puts you on autopilot. It doesn't get you thinking about all of your ranges and how you're going to construct them and whether or not you want a better check. Instead of, like, let's say you only have an overbet on the turn, then your brain is only thinking about polarized scenarios, right? So I really like having all the sizings out of position in a single race pot on turn and river, and it definitely gets my theory brain going. So if you guys enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. It helps support me. It helps, motivate me to keep making content like this. This is all free for you guys. I am not charging anything for the Twitch streams, for the YouTube videos. So any love and support you show is greatly appreciated. And I'll be back with some more episodes. I'm just going to keep churning these out. I hope you guys have been enjoying.